Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Change the World podcast, where we interview young entrepreneurs that are not only changing their communities, but they're also making a big impact in their industries, specifically in real estate. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing a very special guest, someone who 5 or 6 years ago reached out with no idea what they wanted to do and are now killing it in the industry. Today we have none other than the king of underwriting himself, TJ Miller. How you doing, man?
Awesome. Yep. Thanks for having me out to the new venture studio, very professional podcast studio. Looking forward to talking.
Yeah, awesome. So TJ and I met about 5 or 6 years ago through a cold DM on Instagram, and I was, very confused as to why I got the DM. I was only 19 years old at the time. TJ, I think you were 17 or 18 years old. And he was thinking about moving to San Diego and going to school here at San Diego State. And instead of just coming out here and looking at the academics, he wanted to hit the ground running and really start getting internships and opportunities and knowledge from day one. So I thought it was super interesting and admirable what he did. So TJ, walk me through that thought process. You were in high school, senior in high school, thinking about going to SDSU. Most people just apply to the school. If they get accepted, they come here. But you were super proactive about what you were doing. So talk to me about that whole thought process as a senior and what you wanted to accomplish.
That's been a trend my whole life, even before senior year of high school, being willing to work for free to learn. So I remember even back in middle school, I would reach out to high schoolers that had their own small businesses.
Really?
And that's how I was able to get my foot in the door and learn about digital marketing or solar or other forms of clean energy and work for several companies and not get paid, but learn a bunch of different skills, learn about different industries to see what I like and what I didn't like. So, yep.
Yeah. And I think in our generation, especially with social media, people constantly see the flashiness and, the end goal or the end success. And I think what's very unique to you and myself as well is you were looking at the opportunity, not on how much you could make day one, but how much you could learn day one. And it was really hard for people, including myself, to say no to bringing you on when you weren't asking for a salary. Where does that kind of drive or that mentality come from?
I just know that from reading biographies and stuff like that, a lot of people that are in areas where specific knowledge is needed, like a apprenticeship where you're learning from somebody doing something instead of just reading on like the steps of how to get something done, that is very important to learn from like a mentor figure. And so that's what Warren Buffett did when he was learning investing from Ben Graham at Columbia. And Ben Graham told him that free was overpaid. And so it's like when you're in those industries like real estate or investing where you really want to learn from a top person, you can't have the expectation that you're going to get paid really well and you're going to get to learn from them a lot. You kind of just have to be realistic that you're new and you don't have a ton of value to provide. You can do maybe some menial tasks, you can hustle, you can make their lives easier. But as long as you're learning from people throughout that process, it's going to be worth your time. And instead of thinking in terms of like, oh, I need to do this for 5 years or 10 years, just see it as like a small part of your journey where you'll work for free for a year and then you'll reconsider what you want to focus on. And so I think a lot of people that have had success as titans of industry have started out in kind of more menial roles or free roles or like intern type stuff in order to get their foot in the door and really learn something.
Got it. And from that opportunity, I ended up working at a real estate startup. Obviously, you had built a really great relationship, hard work ethic. So I opened the door there, and you started going. But from there, you mentioned you had other internships. You've taken other internships after that. What are some of like the bigger picture things that you've learned from those opportunities? Like, what value have you extracted from those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started at that real estate startup, I was a sales rep. So I got to learn the sales side of it. And then I moved to a sales admin. And so helping you and Sebastian out with your duties, I got to learn kind of what it means to support someone who's in a sales role and be more the behind the scenes operations guy. As a sales rep, I didn't really have any operations experience or get to learn that. And then when I was able to be a sales manager, it just became a new set of skills and a project coordinator working with different departments. So the main thing is don't go into a free or unpaid role thinking you're just going to learn about one area of the business. because often if you prove yourself, you'll be able to learn about all these different sides of it, whether it's HR, finance, accounting, operations, sales, things like that.
Nice. So one of the things, there's kind of like a 5-step process that I talk to a lot of high schoolers when they're looking for an internship or a future career, because I see people that are so lost, right, in their 20s and 30s, and they don't even know where to go, right? So the first thing you did was find something you were good at and passionate about. And then you started identifying your strengths and weaknesses, and really didn't really focus on your weaknesses or let that affect you. You really focused on your strengths. What were some of the strengths that you were able to find that you had?
I found out that I did a better job supporting people that were trying to succeed on the sales team than I did with direct to client conversations. So something that you helped me out is I kind of had the roadblock in my head that I wasn't really good at sales, and you encouraged me to still develop my sales skills. So not necessarily seeing that you're bad on something and closing the door on it forever, but just reshifting your focus. And I've worked on my sales skills since then, but mainly I was able to shift away from a sales rep role into more of an admin role. So I'd mainly say knowing kind of what you're good at, realizing that by, giving it a chance 6 months or a year in a role to see if you fit with it and if it comes naturally to you. And then when you need to make that switch, not beating yourself up about not being good at something and just trying something new.
Got it. So through all of those roles, you learned, hey, I'm really good at operations. You improved your sales skills. You improved all these other skills. And now, 6 years later, TJ you're 23, 24?
23, yep.
TJ at 23 is one of the movers and shakers in the real estate development industry here in San Diego. And you manage how many apartments right now?
The company that I'm with, Skylight Realty, manages about 190 through a few full-time employees.
Wow.
My specific region is the College area by San Diego State, and I manage about 94 units in that neighborhood.
So TJ at 23 is now managing 90-something units. That's huge responsibility that they are given a 23-year-old. How does it feel on a day-to-day to now be entrusted with a lot of this bigger responsibility?
It is a big responsibility because as a property manager, you're kind of the last line of defense to make sure that your tenants have a good quality of life.
Okay.
And so when you're a developer or when you're an investor, it's easy to live in a spreadsheet and look at, what your cost is going to be and what you can rent things out for. But in reality, there are lots of problems that come up, and the property managers that can solve a pressing emergency maintenance request in 3 hours instead of 24 hours are going to make a big difference in the tenants' lives. So especially with the niche that I'm focused on of the student housing, we have about 500 tenants. And for a lot of them, it's their first time ever not living in a dorm or not living with their parents. So if they're completely new to living on their own, they're not going to know how to fix a lot of these problems. And if you're not there to help them quickly, then things in the house can have issues. There can be damage to the property owner. It can be, a pretty important role to try to protect both the owner's investment, make sure the house stays in good condition, and to make sure the students are being looked after and their homes, livable as well.
Got it. And what are some of the biggest challenges that now you find in the property management space that I think people don't realize? I've managed some properties for my parents, but when you're managing that many, I'll get a maintenance request. There's only 4 or 5 properties, right? And I'll get one every week, and I'm stressing out, making sure things get taken care of. What are some of those challenges that come with being a property manager for so many units?
I think it'd be very beneficial for a lot of people that are interested in going into real estate investing to be property managers, just because they would get the realistic perspective of what goes into taking care of a property, making sure it runs on a good budget, runs effectively. Some of the main, drawbacks of being a property manager is you're on call 24/7.
Got it.
So it's if I have 94 units with a lot of students in there and they're moving in August and they come across a bunch of issues, you need to be able to help them, get inside if there's a lockout at any hour of the day, or if there's issues with pests that are in the house, you need to have pest control come out there, or a gas leak. You have to get hotels and you have to coordinate fixing gas leaks. So it's not one of those jobs where you're finished with it at 5 and then you don't have to think about it until the next day. You kind of got to always be on call, like a firefighter, a similar job like that, where if you are needed, you're able to step in and help somebody out.
Got it. And aside from the property management, you're also meeting a lot of these heavy hitters and investors here in San Diego. What you're obviously seeing, that's kind of like an end goal. What do you see as the next step for TJ Miller in his career?
So yeah, great question. What I'm seeing is when I'm a property manager, I get to work with the tenants and I get to work with the owners and see the realistic stuff. But also we have a development arm of the company that's doing construction of these bonus ADU programs or complete community projects where they're adding, 6, 18, 30 units on a lot. So getting to learn from that perspective. For me, I think there are kind of two routes you can go in your real estate investing career. You can go kind of the cash flow route, which is usually out of state, not in California, and you're buying in a state like Indiana or the Midwest or something like that, and you're able to make monthly cash flow, but your property is not going to appreciate as much. And then kind of the space that we're focused on here in San Diego, which is forcing value to be added, and you're going to, force a lot of appreciation. It's going to be worth much more after you add the units, but not get as much cash flow. For me, I'm learning the development game. But I think for a new investor, it could make a little bit more sense to focus on cash flow first. And then once you have the cash flow coming in, that can service the bleed from your development projects. When you're developing, even if you have an occupied unit in the front and you're building in the back, oftentimes your mortgage payment and your construction loan interest is going to be higher than the rent that's coming in. So you're going to need to be able to afford to finance the difference between the two. They call that holding costs or bleed in development. The approach that I'm taking is I'm looking at properties out of state. So if I can cash flow $2,000 a month on a multifamily property in Indiana, then that covers a $2,000 a month bleed on a San Diego project, and I wouldn't need to focus on increasing active income to come up with that bleed. So it's more of a risk-averse approach to build the cash flow and then do the development, but I think it's something that I'd feel more comfortable with.
Got it. And from what I've learned working with you, you're really good at thinking logically. You're really good on spreadsheets. You're really good, at analyzing data. And one of the things that many people look to you for is being able to underwrite deals in San Diego, and you're very knowledgeable on all the laws that are coming in place. So what are some of the things that you look for that you would say, hey, this is a good deal? Here in San Diego, you talked about appreciation, right? So that you would look for an investor that's trying to maximize their dollars and get the most appreciation. What are like the top 3 or 4 things that you're looking for?
Great question. So when you're developing in San Diego, it can be really hard to make money if you're just going to be building one ADU. Say it's a new purchase, because this is a completely different conversation. If you've owned a property and you have a ton of equity in it and you're pulling equity to build something, then it's like your monthly payment isn't going to be as high. But if you're buying a single family home for say $1 million and you're only putting 20% down and you have a large loan balance that might be $6,000 or $6,500 a month, and then you're just going to build one unit, the economics of that might not make sense, because if you've paid $1 million for a single family home and you're just building one unit in the backyard, say by the time you're done, you're all in for $1.4 million. You only have 2 units, so you're in it for $700,000 per unit. You have a high monthly payment on those 2 units. Where what I'm seeing is where this starts to make more sense doing the development in San Diego is when you're building multiple units. So as long as your land acquisition cost, or if you're purchasing the home for a good price, as long as you're building, 4 or 6 units, that's when it starts to make a little bit more sense to pay a little bit more for the land. So specifically what I'm learning, it's a good way to learn what you like by following what the developers are doing. So a good advantage that I have as a property manager is I'm able to see these developers build projects in North Park or Pacific Beach, and I can kind of compare the rents that we're getting in different areas, and I can compare how these properties are doing. And so one of my favorite properties is someone bought a property near San Diego State, and then what they've done in the backyard is they've built 5 duplexes, so a total of 10 units. And so what I learned is that cluster model, where it's not one connected apartment complex, but just 2 units grouped together to avoid MEP and other like restrictions like that, that is a model that tends to work well. So my buy box would probably be like a residential single family lot, 10,000 square feet and higher, or like a residential multifamily lot, 6,000 square feet or more.
Got it. And one of the things that I've heard developers that you work with talk about is entering on comps, exiting on cap rate. And I recently heard another podcast that you were on that you talked about being able to reduce operation costs, because part of finding a property's value is the operational expenses in order to get to our net income. So what are some of the things as a property manager that you're able to do on your side that once you own property, you're going to take into consideration immediately to increase property value? Because it's not just adding units and remodeling, but how do you get your operational costs lower as well?
Absolutely. So when you're evaluating a commercial property, like a 5+ unit multifamily property, it can be evaluated based on the cap rate, or based on the income approach is another term for that kind of appraisal. So what you want to do is you want to save owners money on maintenance, because the more money you save them on maintenance, the more the property is actually worth, because these properties are evaluated based on the rent they bring in and their expenses. So if you keep the expenses lower, the property is worth more. And so what I've seen is, if you're in a market where cap rates are at 5%, which is common in a few areas in San Diego, every $1 you save the owner on maintenance adds $20 in value to the property.
Wow.
And so, if you're able to save an owner $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000, you can significantly increase the value of the property because of what you're doing as a property manager. So in the specific space that I'm in, the student housing that I focus on, there are a lot of times where there are issues where we don't want to send a maintenance technician out there for $50 or $100 to fix something simple. So I can call the tenants and let them know, here's how you can get your water.
Here's a quick YouTube video.
Yeah, get your water heater back on, fix your own garbage disposal. There are problems that come up that the students are, flipping a breaker box. A lot of these students have never flipped a breaker panel. So it's like teaching them ways that they can handle these things themselves, save the owners $50 a month, or, save them from spending a lot on maintenance. That can be a big way to save the owners money. And the second way is by getting multiple bids for projects.
Interesting.
So when you go to like a major plumber, like an Anderson Plumbing, Bill Howe, Roto-Rooter, you might be paying $5,000 or $7,000 for a new water heater or a new tankless water heater, because they're gonna upcharge you for professionals to set it up, do all the drainage and everything like that. But if you're able to have a handyman handle it, then you might only pay $800 for the materials and $500 for the labor. You could save an owner $4,000 or more just on one water heater replacement. So knowing kind of the difference between the traditional plumber charging and like the handyman charging can be big. And then having strong relationships with those vendors, paying them on time, treating them well so that they're, asking for work and willing to come back for those great prices that help the owners out.
That's super interesting. I didn't know that there was that, like those little things like you mentioned, flipping a breaker box or like the garbage disposal, stuff like that make such a big difference. Have you ever like taken on a property and you knew immediately, like, or your company, and you knew immediately like this homeowner or this current owner is way overpaying for a lot of this maintenance stuff?
No, I mean, I don't really have much access to like the historical record, like of what they've paid. But, sometimes there'll be, we go to a house and it has an issue. And so instead of just paying someone to go out there and fix it, we ask the owner, have you done anything about this in the past? And then they can send you bills and invoices from an old plumbing company or an old guy that did renovations. And you can find out that a lot of times the work that they paid for, they thought they were receiving, wasn't actually included in their scope. So kind of like, a heads up to people who own properties is you want to be very clear on the scope of work when you're negotiating with vendors, because sometimes they might do the bare minimum. They might not attack the root cause of the problem. They might just fix the symptoms. And then a few years later, you might end up having to actually pay more to solve that in the future. So that'd be kind of like the main, I don't have access to a lot of the old data on their maintenance spending, but something that owners could do today as they own the property is make sure they're asking questions to these vendors about what they think the root cause of the problem is to make sure that's addressed.
Very interesting. Now, we've talked a lot about property management and a lot of stuff that people don't know, especially if they're about to self-manage their first couple of units. We talked a little bit about like kind of the ideal criteria here in San Diego and a little bit about your story. But a quick break from that and just talking about your goals in life, right? Both within the industry and outside, I saw a big change from when you and I first met, right, to where you are today, right? When I first met you, you had just started college. You were energetic, you were excited, eager to learn. But one big change that I saw probably like 2 years in, you went and for the summer, you went back home, and then you came back and you had put on like muscle, you had grown a beard, and your confidence was through the roof, right? So, and I noticed, like, not only did you learn like the technical stuff, but you also spent a lot of time developing yourself, right? And that's something that took me several years to learn. Like, I had the confidence just because of the speaking gigs that I had, or the podcast, or the books, but I didn't spend a lot of time working on my physical and my mental, fortitude. So what was it that like, kind of switched where you started like developing and gaining that confidence? Because that's something that I think is super awesome from seeing you 6 years ago to where you are today.
Yeah, that's kind of a life hack for any guy is if you want to feel a little bit better, hit the gym, grow a beard, and that'll solve all your problems. So yeah, what I would say is kind of like change. I mean, yeah, when you take care of your physical fitness, that can make a big difference, not just, on how you look, but on how you feel. You can be more confident in yourself. I remember being at the startup and being with clients, and they would call me like buddy and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, like I don't think these guys are really taking me seriously. And then once I grew the beard out, nobody was calling me like buddy or like kiddo, stuff like that anymore. It does make a difference. But yeah, I would say focusing on self-improvement can come down to, what are you reading? How much control do you have over your phone usage? Are you limiting that? What are you telling yourself about yourself, like your mental strength and stuff like that? I think that can make a big difference in how you perform as a real estate agent, a property manager, a developer, or even in other fields. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I know you're currently doing the property management stuff and working with developers. How soon do you see yourself moving into you becoming the investor? Because you have a ton of knowledge, you have a ton of contacts, you obviously have the confidence to do it. What's kind of your timeline? Because I know we've talked about you possibly starting a fund here soon and doing some out-of-state deals and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I've been a investor in 2 deals.
Already? Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Not as somebody who has equity in them, but just as a private money lender.
Okay.
So, learning from those, just lending money to somebody and then setting it up with a promissory note as far as this is the schedule to get paid back, this is what the collateral looks like. And then after the first deal.
Can you talk about some of those deals?
Yeah. So basically, as someone who is familiar with the real estate space in San Diego, there will always be developers around here that need money. I think it's very common for real estate investors, and Grant Cardone talks about this, to be cash poor but asset rich, where they have all kinds of properties and then they get a little bit of earned income and then they put that right back into a deal and then they're struggling to come up with money to like pay bills and stuff. So there are developers all around San Diego that are always looking for more money, and if they were to go to a bank and they were to pull out a loan or something like that, it would take time and it would affect their debt to income. So to actually get a loan out would increase the amount of debt that they have and the monthly payments they're responsible for. That would hurt them with getting approved for a loan in the future because it shows up on their DTI. But if you were to do something like a private money loan with somebody, it's not going to mess up their debt to income. And as long as you have collateral and other terms set up, you can feel safe with that. So you can get, great rates of return, 24% a year, 48% a year, stuff like that, if the person needs the money enough and you're able to structure it in a way that benefits them. 2 ways that you can structure this, there are more than 2, but 2 main ways to structure this is you can give them a lump sum. So say you give somebody $20,000 with a 10-month term. At the end of 10 months, they could pay you that $20,000 principal plus all the interest accrued. Or you can set it up to where you give them $20,000, you get your interest every month along the way, and then you get your $20,000 back.
Which of the 2 do you prefer?
I've done both. I prefer the one with cash flow along the way. I mean, it's the same money that you're going to receive either way on an absolute basis. But if I'm getting $400 a month coming in, I can then reinvest that, whether it's a high yield savings account at 4% or another real estate deal along the way, instead of just getting everything on the back end.
Got it. So now you've actually gone a little bit further than I thought you did. So you've gotten to invest in some of these deals aside from, and we've talked about knowledge being so important today on the podcast, aside from the actual return that you got, what are some of the things that you got to see behind the scenes about the deal that you wouldn't have if you hadn't invested?
Yeah, so the money that I invested in the first deal, it was a North Park one, and it went toward funding the renovations of the property.
Got it.
So I got to go out to the property, record content there, kind of look at what was being done with, the flooring, the bathroom renovations, kitchens, stuff like that. So kind of learn like in person actually what it's like to manage a crew that's doing renovations. And then something interesting is my third deal is I'm actually switching away from debt investing and trying to become an equity investor. So in this, it's a 15-unit property in Indiana. So pretty cool, like back where I grew up.
Awesome.
Yeah, small town in Indiana, about 30 minutes.
So you've already identified one.
Identified the property, doing due diligence, going into it with partners that are more experienced. And just like being willing to work for free in the past, this is a deal that's less about how much money I'm going to make on it and more about what can I learn from it and how can I build a track record. So to be able to say in 3 years, hey, I went full cycle on a 15-unit. We bought it for $55K a door. We sold it for $80K a door. We returned 30%, returns to our investors. That can be really impressive and help a lot with trying to raise for the second deal instead of trying to get as much, out of the deal as I can and really milk it for, as much money that I can make. I'd rather be able to learn and have that on my track record.
That's awesome, man. So you've already started investing in several deals. You're about to take on another one. Now, one of the things that I struggle with, I'm 24 years old, so technically I'm a year older, and we often compare ourselves to the other investors that are really killing it in the industry that we both know. And a lot of times I forget, like, they're in their 40s, right? They're in their late 30s, but we're comparing head to head, right? My 5 years of experience with their 20, right? And my resources compared to theirs. So one of the things that Antonio and I talked about on the last podcast is measuring backwards, right? So being like, okay, 5 years ago, I was selling first-time homebuyer condos at $300K. I was selling mobile homes for $100,000 and making $2,000 or $3,000 in commissions. Now we're involved in multi-million-dollar investments, whether equity partners, private money lenders, whatever we're doing. What is one thing if 17 or 18-year-old TJ that cold DM'd me for an internship 6 years ago, what would be the one thing that he'd be the most proud of you today?
Yeah, I think I'm a more disciplined person than I was back then. I think I have a little bit more clarity on where I'm going. And I think when you're 17 or 18, it's not a bad thing to not have clarity. It's a bad thing to not want clarity. So You should be at a point where you're 17 and 18 where you're trying a bunch of different stuff, but you shouldn't beat yourself up because you haven't found what you want to do for the rest of your life. That's common, and that's probably what everybody goes through. So I'd say the main difference is that person just wanted to try a bunch of different stuff, and now I'm pretty much more focused than I was back then. I kind of know what I want out of life, and just learning along the way, kind of like what makes you feel good, what makes you happy, and when you don't have much commission income or salary income, like those early days at the startup, you start to think that $10,000 a month will make you happy, or hitting a certain income goal in a year will be great. And then once you kind of hit those goals, you realize that, the goal was actually more to improve yourself and, who the money can make you and the impact you can have, more so than just getting the income. So that's been kind of another learning lesson as well. Is the person I was, in my earlier 20s or late teens was much more money focused about how can I make this much money in a month or in a year. And then now, from seeing people that are wealthier and they're still kind of unhappy, I've kind of reshifted my focus to, how can I take care of my mind? How can I take care of my body? And how can I go after the goals that I'm going after?
No, that's incredible. And I think one of the other things that you just mentioned is the money allows you to have an impact as well. And one of the things that I like talking to people that come on the podcast is the legacy that you're going to leave. Right? So we're very young to be thinking about legacy, but what is like one of the things that I admire and I think I'm super proud of is I've known you for all this time. We've worked together. We've not worked together. You've grown as a person. I'm like rooting on the sidelines for you to kick butt in the real world. But you've always been like the kindest person. And I think aside from the money and the, expertise and the reputation you're getting in the industry, which is all positive, I don't think anybody who knows you personally can be like, TJ's not one of the top 3 kindest people that I know, right? So that already like changes people's mind and perspective, right? You're always super positive. So just hanging out with you, every time we hang out, I always leave there like, hey, life is great, you know? And without you knowing, you're probably impacting a lot of people just by the way you are. Aside from that, is there a vision on who you want people to think of as TJ Miller 10 years, 20 years from now, and that legacy you're leaving for the Miller name with your parents that I've met and everything else?
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Yeah, one of the main things I want to do is I want to give a lot of people a start in real estate investing.
Okay.
Because when we went to San Diego State, that wasn't really something that was necessarily taught. I mean, you could take courses on it, you could take electives on it, but a lot of people just think that the way for them to grow their money is to save up money from your job, to put it in the stock market or just a retirement account, and then when you're 65 or whatever, you think it would have appreciated and you can take that money out. A lot of people don't realize that a 10% return from the stock market isn't the only option out there.
Yeah.
And they can hit, a 15% annual return or 20% or more with a lot of these real estate deals, whether it's development or multifamily, so many different avenues that they can make money from. So what I want to do is, do deals with other people, and the people that trust me with their money, I want to make sure that they hit the returns that exceed not only, the stock market, but, what I promised them or what I tell them they should expect, that kind of things. I think there's a big opportunity to take people that would be making 10% in the stock market and help grow their money through real estate. Another big one is doing development projects that I can feel super proud of, because we will see a lot of projects, not just in North Park where there's been a lot of construction, but all around San Diego where, developers are using cheap construction, they're getting units up fast, they don't look the best, and it is providing people more housing, but it doesn't look as great, and the renters that live there can't feel as proud of the place they live.
Got it.
There are a lot of really cool projects done by great architects that, might not be maximized for fitting as many units in a tight space as possible, but have really cool design features and it can make people really happy to live in them. What I would like to do is have the cash flow from a multifamily portfolio to afford to do these projects that don't make the most economic sense. I don't want to be all in for $2 million for a project that's worth $3 million and I'm not proud of it. I want to get to the point where I can financially support a project that, I'm all in for $2.5 million and it's worth $3 million. Not as much equity is created, but I can be really proud, take kids or take other people to see that property and feel better about it.
Yeah. And I heard Chris Luna, which we both know and someone we look up to, that he said that a lot of the properties that he used to own, like they were amazing returns, but he would pull up to the house and there would be beer cans in the front and stuff like that. And that's why he moved a lot of his money to a nicer area like Pacific Beach where, people take care of their stuff. So that's super interesting. And now in California, right, housing is one of the biggest issues that we see. And being able to, leave a legacy, right? And one day, I know we one of the things we bonded over at the beginning when we first met was Axe Capital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what was that show? Billions?
Yep, Billions.
Right? And he had like his name on a building, right? It would be so sick to have like one of the like very unique buildings here in San Diego that just has like Miller like across the top, right?
Yeah.
So with that, I think the last thing I kind of want to leave on is what are like one or two things that you would advise someone who's young, also in their early 20s or late teens, to help them find a career path that they're passionate about and be able to find a legacy and really like become a better version of themselves with all the distractions that there are now in the world. Mm-hmm. What's one or two pieces of advice that you have for them?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, whether they're recent high school graduates or in college or just got out of college, their biggest enemy in their 20s is probably going to be themselves. It's very easy nowadays to get distracted and spend a lot of time on your phone and, consume a bunch of content instead of really, dial in on where you want to go. And I think if you can limit your screen time, if you can take care of your body and devote more time toward your career and your relationships, that'll make a lot, that'll make a big difference. I don't think in business you need to think about your competitors too much. I mean, maybe in some other industries you do, but in real estate, I don't think it really matters too much what a lot of people around you are doing. I mean, you can learn from them, but I think it matters much more what you're doing with your own time. So some actionable advice that I can give the audience is you should do a time block and you should map out what you're doing with each hour of your day. So say between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m., you have a list, and this is what I do is I'll say like 8 to 9, this is what I have planned. And then at the end of the hour, I have another box of what I actually did. And so at the end of the day, I have some accountability where I can go back and I can check, I said I wanted to be working on underwriting for an hour. I only did it for 15 minutes and then I was on my phone. Okay, that it feels bad to see it in writing. So it makes me want to correct it for the next time. Another piece of actionable advice that I learned from Alex Hormozy, he got this clock on Amazon. It's like a circular timer that he has. And so you can set it, and I set mine to 30 minutes. And then it's a 30-minute countdown, and I have to focus on one thing with no distractions for 30 minutes.
Interesting.
And if I get distracted, I have to reset it and start over. And so that helps me because I track.
You're like, it works great. I have to focus for the next 2.5 weeks now.
Yeah, exactly. Way behind. And so it helps me because I can track, by each day trying to beat like previous best scores. So say I did 4 focus blocks or 6 focus blocks. The next day I can try to do a little bit more. Another thing that I'd recommend for people is to download this app called Inertium, and that's spelled Inertium. That's an app I have where it's a checklist for habit tracking so that I can have a goal of, being done with my phone at 11:20 p.m. 4 out of the 7 nights a week. And then every night that I do that, I do a green check. I click the button and get a green check. And then if there's a day I don't do that, I have to click it and make it a red check. And it looks awful. It hurts to see those red checks. So kind of playing these games with yourself. You're tracking exercise, screen time, all kinds of different stuff, how many focus blocks you do to try to hit certain goals throughout the week. Because people say that you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. It's very easy to have big goals of wanting a massive portfolio or to make a lot in active income every year. But if you have systems and standards of the bare minimum is I'm going to read 20 pages a day, 5 days a week, then, having that in place as kind of a floor instead of a ceiling, that floor is really going to help you stay on the right track.
That's super interesting. Well, thank you again, TJ, for coming out. We're going to have a lot more guests that are also young entrepreneurs coming up right now in San Diego and hopefully expand this podcast. I've had a lot of people that have told me to do this, and I have a lot of contacts like yourself that have some amazing stories. So thank you for sharing all that advice, the tips with the property management, the tips with the development, the things you've learned and really how you've developed. And again, I'm super proud of where you've come and where you're going, and I'll be rooting on the sidelines and on to the next episode.
Likewise. Thank you, guys.